All right. Well, hey, thanks for allowing me to be a part of your meeting. And I'm one of those that if you've got any questions, feel free to ask at any time. If you put it into the chat box and someone finds the question there, just make sure that we'll get that answered immediately. But I am Jeff Clark, originally from Mount Pleasant, Texas. Went to school at Mississippi State University, got a weed science degree, worked for them for a little bit, and then went to work for Dow AgroSciences. And then how Corteva was born was when Dow and DuPont came together, merged their companies together, and the whole agriculture division spun off and became Corteva AgroScience. For them, for the last 8 years, I have been one of their range and pasture specialists. And I reside in the East. I pretty much cover everything from Tennessee East as a specialist. So you've probably seen me at several meetings or maybe at different trade shows in the past and everything. But again, it is good to be able to be here tonight, even though it's on Zoom. I tell you, I have done plenty of Zoom calls this year, and I'm still not good at it. So Dr. Harmon, I understand completely where you're coming from. So, but tonight we're going to talk about pastures. We're going to talk about pasture management and the importance of that. And then we're going to tie it all off at the end, talking about how herd health, all right, plays a part in this, how herd health plays a part in this. We're not going to get too deep into it, but you will start to see more of a herd health conversation with Corteva from their pasture management moving forward. But we're going to talk about why is it important to have pasture management. We're going to talk about 4 building blocks to successful pasture management, and then we'll round it all out again with the herd health and take on some of your questions. So how many people can agree with this statement right here? Grass is the center of the cattleman's universe. The simple thing is this: you cannot own cattle, run cattle, or even be a sustainable cattle operation unless you have good forages. Yes, you can feed in hoop barns. Yes, you can feed on concrete pads. Yes, you can do all types of niche and great ideas, but at the end of the day, cattle have to have forages. Somehow, some way, they are a ruminant animal and they got to have forages. So at the end of the day, if you're going to be a cattleman or you're a generational cattleman, and I say cattlemen as in both sexes, cattle women and cattle men, we know where the brains are at, ladies, I promise you, but you've got to have forages, all right? The other thing about having good forages is this: we want to try to put in as much as possible on land that we own instead of having to go out and always having to lease land or find that extra acre when we really could, through good, proper pasture management, open up those acres, increase that grazing capacity, which then increases our stocking capacity. So let's talk about some pasture progression right quick. So this is a field that if we are not managing it, you can see just by the nice little cartoon characters on here, we have a pretty good little herd on this field. But as you also see, an encroachment of annual weeds, perennial weeds, and biennial weeds start to come in, and if they are not properly taken care of, then we can start to see a reduction in our herd. And what I mean by that is simply running into a problem like this, where we start to have Mother Nature going back to what she knows to do best, and that is go back into that forest setting. The other thing is here is you might have some people say, well, you can graze cattle, they'll on weeds, and they'll eat weeds and everything. Why would you want to do that? Why would you want to do that? That kind of turns into an issue pretty quick with the vet, with the vet bill. We want to make sure that we are getting the massive amount of forages that we can possibly get per acre for those cattle. So we're not running into this and they are grazing good, clean, high protein grasses that are going to help add those pounds to your grazing stockers to your cow-calf operation, okay? Now, I want you to understand this as well. You'll start to see that acronym quite a bit as we move on, either through the screen here or through my voice. But understand this, and I know you do, but a stocking reduction gives us a less return investment. Now, if you say, well, I'll just go out there and start leasing more land or even buying more land, you know as well as I do, as a cattle person myself, that is a cost that is going to hit your bottom line pretty quick. So we must start at ground level. So if you ever have me come out, and I know probably some of y'all have had me come out to your farms or heard me speak in person with some demonstration, either whether it's through the co-op or through University of Tennessee, we must start at ground level. The worst thing we can do, especially when we're dealing with herbicide, is say, okay, well, I've sprayed this herbicide and you know, it really did a great job. It knocked the tops off of it, or it turned the weed brown. But I want you to understand what is going on underneath that soil surface is very, very important. Because at the end of the day, we can make any weed look sick. We can make any weed turn brown. We can make any weed look like we have done something. But if we have not controlled the root system of that weed, whether it's a perennial weed, a biennial weed, or a perennial brush species with rhizomes, we haven't done anything. If anything, we have made the situation worse, and here's why. If we take a look underneath the soil surface right here, all right, I'm gonna look at my bigger screen on my computer as we go through this, if you don't mind. But if you would look, this is where we want to be. We have a good stand of grass, good lush stand of grass. We can tell by this pictorial that it is not in a stressful situation, either from hay production, grazing production. It's got some really good organic matter in it. But look at this right here. This is where we need our grass root systems. Heavily elongated, good color to them. It's getting in down here into the deeper soil banks, into the soil colloids that are holding water and nutrients, whether it's macro or micronutrients down there. It is helping our grasses when we do go into a grazing situation where maybe we do graze a little heavier than normal, or we run into those drought months like some of my geography has seen this year. A really good healthy root development helps that top growth. So the next time that you're out in your pastures and you're checking your fine cattle or your calves, I want you to look down at what they're grazing. Look how elongated their top growth is on their grass, because that will give you a good depiction of how deep or shallow their root system is. So if you have a grass stand that's roughly about 3 to 4 inches, you can flip your hand and say, okay, that's probably the depth of my root system. How do I get that root system to get deeper? That's where pasture management comes into key. That's where you are able to graze a little bit longer in that fall time period before you've got to put out that first round bale of hay, and it saves you money. But if we're not allowing proper pasture management to take place in our ranching operation, and we're allowing perennial weeds, even annual weeds, biennial weeds to come in, when they start to set their root system, what starts to happen? Well, they start to choke out the grass root system. They start shading the top part of your grass, so you'll start to immediately see a shorter grass stand, a thinner grass stand. We'll talk more about that here in a minute, because that is one of our 4 steps that we'll get to. But down here underneath that soil surface is where all of the bad stuff is happening. It starts choking out the weeds, or excuse me, it starts the weed root system starts choking out that grass root system. A perennial weed, whether it is a fibrous root system or a tap root system or even a rhizomic root system, is so aggressive that it can reach deeper, go farther out, and grab those nutrients and water supplies that are in the soil that the grass is so desperately needing, and it starts to wither these grass roots. And next thing you know, you've only got grass roots that are only about maybe 1.5 inches in the depth of the soil. And that is not enough. That's not enough to keep a healthy, grazable pasture at all. So it's very important that we manage our grass, we manage these weeds so we don't run into that problem. That's why we must start off with what is going on underground. Because 2,4-D, something that Dow Chemical created many years ago, will make a plant look really sick. But if we're not controlling that root system, if we're not killing the generator, if we're not killing the storehouse of all those carbohydrates, that food source, we are doing no good. If anything, we're making it a bigger problem. Why is that? Because we're making that root system go into a stress mode. It shuts down sending food up to the top. It starts elongating itself, going out into that deeper soil bank, and therefore makes it a very hard hole. It might take a little longer. It might take more herbicide, and therefore it can cost you in the long run just a tiny bit more money. But that tiny bit more money can be feed, it can be mineral, and it can be even trying to retain some heifers that you would like to keep for a closed herd, but you can't. So you got to sell them. And that's where it becomes a bad return of investment, not managing that. So let's go forward here. Maybe. Please. There we go. Where do we start? All right, where do we start? That's usually the biggest question I get is, Jeff, I just don't know. This seems very overwhelming. I can assure you this. Managing your pasture is not overwhelming. Okay? It is honestly one of the easiest things to do, one of the easiest tools in the toolbox for a rancher to do in his or her cattle operation. Okay? But usually we want to do other things first. Usually we want to buy a whole bunch of feed or a whole bunch of mineral or go buy a whole bunch of fertilizer. And then we skip out on really and truly what should be at the very top of what needs to be done at your operation. Because at the end of the day, we got to have forages for a ruminant animal to what? Survive and do a good job for us. Keep going here. So here's my 4 building blocks for you. Most of y'all have all seen this over the years past. This won't change because this works. You can read a lot of publications. You can read things on the internet. You can have some of the most high-paid speakers, high-powered speakers come out and listen and speak wonders in your ears. But at the end of the day, if you do these four building blocks, you can take care of your pasture problem, your pasture headache, your pasture management this coming Saturday on your day off. First of all, it must start with soil fertility. Now, you might ask, well, why in the world are you saying soil fertility when you're talking about weed management and you work for a company that sells chemical that kills weeds? Because at the end of the day, if your soil fertility is not in check, the grasses will not do what they are supposed to do, even at the removal of weeds. We are trying to grow grass, not just kill weeds. That's easy. Growing grass is a necessity. It's a must. So it starts with the soil. We must have our soil fertility in check. Then number 2, then we can go to our weed management program, okay? That's where you can either work with your local extension agent, you can work with your local co-op, you can work with your local university. You can even call me up. The only thing I require out of you is a glass of sweet tea, all right? We can put a plan together for you that you don't have to wait a year or 2 years or 10 years down the line before the greatest technology comes out. You can put it to practice immediately. If anybody knows me as a 4th generation cattle rancher myself, raised up in the business, still in the business, running probably too many head of cattle for me being on the road as much as I am. At the end of the day, I don't like things you have to wait on. Let's put things together that we can do immediately, okay? Science is great, absolutely. But a lot of this is just common sense of putting some things together that you probably already have or can go down to the local co-op and get immediately. Then we're going to talk about grazing management, because at the end of the day, soil fertility and weed management, we can take care of from you from an industrial point. But if you don't do these last two blocks yourself, you're going to revert right back and it's going to cost you a lot of money. So grazing management is a very, very important building block on here, okay? That is something you control. We can tell you what to do. We can give you examples, which you'll see here in just a minute. But at the end of the day, you have to properly manage that field by your grazing. Because here's what's going to happen. Soil fertility is going to get in check. We're going to get weed management done. And guess what? Your grass is going to respond to that because it's not being suppressed. It's not being choked out. It's not, you know, it's feeling very good, excited to grow. It's going to be lush. It's going to have a really good palatability to it. And guess what those cattle are going to do? They are going to turn into horses. And then if you know what I mean by that, a horse will eat in one spot until it is blowing dirt. And then it's going to take a half a step forward and do the same thing. They pluck the grass out of the ground, but they really hover in one spot. Cattle will do the same thing when their forages are high in palatability, high in protein, taste good, they want it, they will graze it down. So you have to manage that grazing so your grasses are not being placed in a stress position. Then at the end of this, you might see that after building block number 2, which is weed management, you might find under certain weed species, you're going to have to reseed some grasses. You're going to have to, you know, you might have a lot of dead skeletons out there and then realize, scratching your head, man, I had more weeds than I had grasses, and I thought I had more grasses than I had weeds. And you might have to implement some grass seed, and that's okay. Keep going here. Let's talk about soil fertility. We're going to go through each 4 of these blocks just to give you a little snippet of some information. So soil fertility, where do we want to be at? We want to be in this 6.5, 7 pH. Grasses are going to respond really well at this point right here. All right. This is getting a lot of your micro and macro nutrients into the ground. We go down here on this low end, all right, which is where a lot of hay fields run into. A lot of hay fields run right here. And why is that? Because most people, when they take off the hay, they don't put back the nutrients that must go back that have been now removed. So if you think about it, if you're not doing that after just about every season, okay, then you can be 3 or 4 years behind the 8 ball of having the proper nutrients in there, and yet you're asking it to give you tonnage. You're asking it to give you that grazing, that high protein grazing pasture in the wintertime in a round bale, 5x4 round bale, 4x5, excuse me. So we want to make sure that, especially with hay fields, we're putting back what we're taking off. Remember this, weeds love acidity. They will grow very, very on fire right here in this area, 5, 5.5, even up to that 6. And you say, well, if I get my fertility up, they won't grow. No, actually, they love it even more over here. Here's the thing, folks. Whether you're running from a 4 to a 9 on a pH, weeds are going to grow. They love it. They love it. Now, certain species might not grow as vigorous, but at the end of the day, you're always going to have weeds. So what do we got to do? We've got to get our soil fertility in check so that our grasses can respond faster than our weeds can germinate. And our grasses, all right, after we've done our due diligence with our chemical use, our grasses become our weed deterrent by shading out, by not allowing those weed seeds that are in that top 2 inches of our soil ready to germinate. Them grasses are not allowing sunlight and they're not allowing moisture. they're taking it all. They're hogging it up. And therefore, you have a less stand of weeds and you have a better stand of forage, which your cows are going to send you a Christmas card saying, thank you. All right, keep going here. Broom sage, something that we run into every year. This right here is a great telltale sign of low pH. But there's another thing, because you can maybe tell me, well, no, I get a soil sample every year, or at least twice every 2 years, doing a biannual treatment. And my pH is good, but I still have darn broom sage. I'm gonna tell you right now, potash. There isn't a state, there isn't a county, there isn't a farm east of the Mississippi that has enough potash to put back into the soil system to where you don't run into broom sage issues, okay? You might have a few areas in Tennessee where potash is a little bit up, or maybe some potassium is up there, but when we're talking about our potash, you can never put enough back onto the pastures. You really cannot. That will allow that broom sage to start dissipating out. The other way to get rid of it is, and this is probably one of the only times you'll ever hear me talk about mowing, is this. This is a perennial grass. It will put out a seed. All right. Most of you, if you've got some of this in there, in your pastures, you're probably seeing it. If you haven't mowed it yet, you're probably seeing the seed out there. All right. So that's helping it replenish itself. If you've got this problem and you're working with your fertility, you're working with adding more potash into that soil bank, maybe go out there and mow it before it goes to putting out a seed. The other thing about mowing it before it puts out a seed is that when it's in its true vegetative state, cattle love it. They will eat it, okay? So they will also help you eradicate it by going in there and eating it. The other thing about overgrazing, just want to show this picture right here. This also, down here at the bottom picture, this definitely hurts. If you can see, these cattle are trying to, gosh, they're probably getting a bunch of dirt in their mouth and everything as well. But this right here is where I was talking about on grass height, okay? So you might say, well, I'll just use fertilizer. Fertilizer is going to be the answer for weed control. Fertilizer is going to be the answer for eradicating a lot of my problems. So I'll just use fertilizer. That'll also increase my pH, which on that you are correct. But I want you to understand something. You're not going to get out of the weed problem, okay? So at Mississippi State University did this survey where we found that weeds per pound in 1 acre check plot, no fertilizer, no herbicide. We had 1,893 pounds of weeds in that 1 acre lot, 830 pounds of forage, actual grazable forages in that 1 acre lot. Now, you know as well as I do, stocking capacity just went through the floor, all right? If you use fertilize only, did you get rid of some of the weeds? Annual weeds, probably so, but your perennial weeds, not a bit. But what happened over here? Well, you have a net loss of 74 pounds of grazable forages in that 1 acre check plot. So what has happened? Those perennial weeds took up your nutrients and left your grasses out to die. Therefore, you had a net loss. Now your stock capacity's really gone through the floor, all right? Now, keep going here. If we used a herbicide, and we're fixing to get more into this here in just a minute. If we used a herbicide, but let's just say we used a herbicide from Corteva, and we took care of our fertilization, look what happens to the weeds, and look what happens to your grazable forages. Well, now we have a net positive of 2,076. So instead of selling that cow-calf pair, or maybe those 2 cow-calf pairs, you're now retaining them, and you've got 3-in-1s. You're able to get her bred back. She's got a calf on the side, and you're not having to sell anything. Your stocking capacity has not gone down. It's actually probably increased. So herbicide alone will give us increase of pounds of grass by 131%. But when we take care of that pH, when we're taking care of that soil fertility, guess what? We've increased our pounds of grass by 250%. By 250%. That's on 1 acre. Explode that over 40, 50, 60, 100 acres. That's a good, strong return of investment by just taking care of that one building block. And you know as well as I do, that's a soil sample sent off to your co-op or to your university extension. Then not only getting your soil sample back, but doing what the analysis says, making a phone call and getting maybe not all your acres done. You might not be budgeted for all your acres, but getting some of those acres taken care of will increase your stocking capacity and your forages. So let's talk about weed management. All right, weed management. Oh my goodness, how many people love to jump on that John Deere tractor and get happy on the weekends and say, I am taking care of my weeds by mowing them suckers down. So what about mowing for weed management? All right. So I think this is where one of my questions is going to come up, if I'm not mistaken. Slide 16.
You are correct. It should be up.
Yeah. All right. So question is this: does mowing cost me anything as I weed for if I'm mowing for weed control?
No.
Give it just a few more seconds. We still got some answers coming in. Okay. I think we have probably stopped.
All right. So
there's a share.
93% yes, 8% no. Maybe it should be 7%, but I think we understand that. Absolutely, it does cost you. Absolutely, it costs you. And here's how it costs you. I want you to look at this picture right quick before we move forward to the next slide. What's happening here? So you got this gentleman out there. He's already allowed his weeds to go to maturity. So we got goldenrod in here. Looks like we got maybe some plumeless thistle in here. So this old goldenrod, perennial weed, he's going to mow this down. He's going to do what? First thing, he's spreading seed. All right. He's taking that big rotary box fan right there. And when he hits that, he is going to distribute the seed into a more broader area. Secondly, all these weeds that are down here are going to get mowed. These weeds that are down here, and we know that there's weeds down here because weeds are growing at all different heights right now. This is an active summer, obviously. But all these weeds that are down here, these perennial weeds, well, now they are being cut. So we're creating a number 2 problem. Remember what I said a while ago? A hardier root system. Okay. So now when we go back here and spray, they're going to be harder to control. Why? Because they have created a larger food source. Number 3, what are we trying to grow here? Grass. And he's mowing it. So he's getting rid of what we're trying to save, right? So remember this, anytime you go out and you mow your pasture, unless you raise that box fan up, Okay. I call it a box fan because it's a seed distributor. But unless you raise that up to a pretty good height, you're still going to knock some of your grasses down, and you could be putting those grasses into a more severe stress situation than they're already in right now. Then what do you leave back here? Well, you leave this. I'm going to show this next picture for you right quick. You leave this. This is just down the road from where we run cattle here in West Virginia. What do we see here? A lot of dead grass. No, this is not, cut for hay. This was actually the guys out there was mowing his pastures. He had a lot of weeds in it. Now it looks lush and green here, but remember what I said? You can go out and spray and you might find out you had more weeds than you had grass, even though it all looks green. That's exactly what's going on in this field because I drive by it every day that I'm home. But where all these strips are at, it's like leaving a hay bale out in a pasture. And if you want to get on one of my biggest pet peeves is when I'm traveling or when I go to someone's farm is leaving the hay bale out in the pasture for weeks on end. What are you doing to where that grass is at underneath that hay bale or underneath this right here where this grass has been cut? You're smothering it really quickly, and you can have dead strips of grass in here. That takes away your grazing. You're losing what you're trying to grow and you're needing to grow if you're going to be a sustainable cattle operation. So yes, it does cost you. So not only does it cost you in spreading more seed, instead of having it in one area, and we can eliminate that really quick, all right? But you're distributing it out. You're creating it costs you by creating a hardier plant root system, and it's costing you because you're smothering out and you're mowing those grasses that you're trying to grow for forages. But let's look on a little bit of an economic side of what it's costing you personally. For you to own your own equipment and go out and mow, it's going to cost you somewhere in between the $15 and $25 an acre mark. Now, just the other day, I saw an ad for someone who obviously does pasture mowing, and he charged $40 an acre. $40 an acre. If you were to go out and mow and do it for weed control, you got to remember, we have to think perennial weeds. So you're going to mow them, they're going to grow right back. Just like in this picture here, all these perennial weeds that he's mowing, even the ones that's gone into their pre-reproductive cycle, they're going to return to a vegetative state. They're going to come back. That's what a perennial weed does, okay? You're going to have to mow at least 2 times, but typically you're going to fall into that 3-time period. That is at $40 an acre custom treatment. That is what? 3 times 4 is 12, so $120 an acre. I don't know about you, but I couldn't stay in the cattle business that long. If that's the program I had to do, knowing that I can go out here and get a sprayer, either the co-op to come spray it, or maybe a custom applicator to come spray it and spray it, or even do the dry fertilized impregnation where we take the Corteva herbicide of Duracor or Grazon Next and add it into the dry fertilized preels, and we do a 1-pass system of fertilization and weed control all at one time. You're looking somewhere around $15 to $20 easy for just a herbicide application. If you're doing a DFI, you're maybe up around $25 to $27 an acre, but definitely not $120 an acre. So yes, it does cost you by mowing. Now, are there certain times you might hear me say, hey, it's time to go mow? Yes, and here's why. If we're in a salvage situation, you're wanting to spray, but everything is just blown up around you because time can sometimes be a restraint. I understand that. All right. Then you might have me come out on your farm and evaluate it and say, look, I think the best thing to do is, and it's going to be hard for me to say, but maybe you do need to go out and top your pastures, not gut mow it, raise that mower all the way up to, and we're just topping it to put everything back into a vegetative state. Then we can spray. But I'm going to also tell you, we're going to have to spray probably 2 to 3 years in a row. We've got to control that root system, and we got to get them grasses back to growing in a proper manner. Okay. So when we go out and we spray, or if you see this picture down at the bottom right, we go out and do that dry fertilizer impregnation. We need to understand something. What are we targeting and when? Make sure we are knowing the product. Read the labels and the product information. If you do your own spraying, make sure you are calibrating that sprayer at the beginning of every spray season. And you might say, well, I calibrated it last year, put it up in the barn. Why would I need to do that? Dirt daubers. You ever had cows get in your barn or cows get around your equipment? Maybe I'm the only one, but it has happened where they bump it. It's just a good rule of thumb before you start dumping money into that tank, go calibrate it. Go calibrate it. Takes 20 minutes, calibrate your sprayer, and it eliminates a season long of headaches. Okay? Make sure you're going out with the correct rates when you go out. That is one thing that as many times as I have brought this up, it is something that continues to happen continually. Don't cheat your rates to get across that extra half acre or that extra acre. Okay? The reason is that when you cheat your rates, you're going to spend more money. At the end of the day, you're going to spend more money. You're not going to get the weed control that you're needing, and you just wasted time and money. And yeah, I'm sure your time has a value to it. Make sure you're going out with the correct volume of gallons per acre. The freest thing in your tank is water. Use it wisely, not sparsely. Make sure that you're going out and using enough water to get coverage. And what I mean by that is most of us in the cattle business aren't running golf courses. Okay. And if you are, I want to have a talk with you because I want your business plan. Because that's where I'd rather be doing half the time instead of doing farm work and fence work and cow work and weaning right now a bunch of calves. I'd rather be on the golf course and have a little bit of relaxation. Don't cheat the freest thing in your tank, the water. Here's why. We go out with enough water, and I'm a person that if you ask me what the gallons per acre is that Jeff you would want to use, it's going to be 20 plus. Even though our labels say 15, I want 20 plus, and here's why. We live in a reality world, not in a label world. All right. We have a weed canopy. We have mature weeds up here that we need to get contact on. We have weeds right here that are still in its vegetative growth, but it is going into, ramping up into its reproductive cycle. We have weeds that are down here on ground level, as you can see right in here. We have weeds that are on ground level that are in its early V stage, vegetative stage, okay? But then here's the other thing. Here's the other canopy that we want to get down into that we typically forget about. And if we don't use enough water to get down there in settings like this, and this is not a picture off of Google, this is a legitimate picture from a pasture. If you're using a residual herbicide, where do you need that herbicide to go? Not only on the plants, but to the soil. Because if you are using a residual herbicide and you're not getting any residual use out of it, then you are wasting a ton of money. Your return of investment is not going to be on the positive side. It'll be on the negative side. How do you change that? Increase your volume per acre. Increase those gallons. The more water, the better. You're going to get coverage on that leaf structure of that plant. You're going to get good coverage on those plants that are hiding underneath this taller canopy. More importantly, you're going to make sure that you're getting enough into that soil surface that's going to give you that half-life residual, that 40, 50-day residual there, so that your grasses can do what they're supposed to do, grow healthily. All right. The other thing is, even though you've got a field cleaned up, what about doing some maintenance spraying? Absolutely, because you peel back your forages over here, you might find some old dandelions hanging around, okay? You might find some biennial plants hanging around. So even under a good grass stand, you can still have some that slip through. So even if you're doing a maintenance spray, don't cheat your water. Treat it just like you would treat this pasture over here to the left. More volume. 20 gallons per acre is a good rule of thumb to start at. You might need to increase it, but I don't ever see a need to decrease that water, okay? Keep going here. We're also wanting to make sure that we're getting critical contact on those perennial roots. This is a picture I took. That's my little boot shoes right there. We were in Kentucky. I believe that was an agronomist from University of Kentucky that was with me. We were pulling up chicory plants and just looking at these massive tap roots that they carry. This dude right here is 22 inches long. 22 inches long. Now, I want you to think about that for a minute. 24 inches is 2 foot. This thing was in the ground 22 inches in depth. That's what happens when you mow, because this is a field that was a continuous mowed field. And it increased that root system to be more vigorous and go deeper into that soil surface to survive. And when you do that, you have a lot of carbohydrates up in here, a lot of food source. That's where you run into problems. So we want to make sure that through that gallons per acre, we're getting critical contact, as much water on that plant, because as water on that plant means herbicide on that plant, so that we can combat this big generator right here, okay? The other thing is, look, this white vervain weed, if you pulled it out of the ground, look at all these little fibrous roots that are reaching out all over the place in that soil system, okay? Way more aggressive than grass. We want to make sure that this right here, where it starts its leaf structure, if it turns brown, great. We want to make sure this right here is dead, is turning black, is gone. Because when this is gone, that plant is gone, okay? When this up here looks brown, but this is still alive, that plant is still alive and you've done nothing, okay? So we want to make sure that that critical contact, in as much volume as we can onto those plants, it will pay off, all right? So when we're talking about weed management, I want to close out the building block number 2 with this. When am I seeing my weed problem? Don't do the old shotgun approach. Don't go and spray in the spring and expect to have no weed issues the rest of the year. It doesn't work like that. Pick your poison. And what I mean by that is this. Are you having more issues in the springtime? And what I mean by issues is this. Am I having a less stocking capacity, less forage capabilities in my spring, in my summer, or maybe I want to be proactive and do some fall stockpiling, and therefore maybe I need to do some fall spraying so that I can stockpile those pastures up a little bit to elongate those days before I have to put out that pasture in a round bale out for my cattle. Am I being proactive or reactive? And what I mean by that is this. Are you being proactive, which means you're wanting to get ahead of when those weeds go to the reproductive cycle? You're scouting your field. You are paying attention. You're in the game. Reactive is kind of like the old phone calls that I get every April. I got this yellow flower. What can I do to kill it? That's being reactive. When you start to see the plant in its full reproductive stage, and a lot of the times it's going to cost you more at that, because it's going to be, hey, go mow it and let's spray it when it gets back into its vegetative stage. Or there's no use of spraying it because it's an annual and it's already done its job. It's delivered its seed to the soil bank, and that plant, it's on its way out anyway. Okay. So we want to make sure we're proactive. When am I having the biggest issues? Spring, summer, or my fall stockpiling? Then let's be proactive about it. And then again, am I using the correct herbicide? You can go out there and get a lot of herbicides, non-residuals, residuals, but at the end of the day, Am I using the correct herbicide for the weeds I'm wanting to control? I was in a pasture just the other day, on Monday to be exact, or Tuesday. Gosh, everything's kind of rolling fast now. And the guy was complaining. He used Graze On Next and went out to the pasture. And what Graze On Next was supposed to control, it controlled great. But he wasn't happy because he had a field full. I'm talking about, you'd think this gentleman was growing it as a crop of buckhorn plantain. And it was yellow, and that's it. Well, that's what Graze On Next is supposed to do. But he's like, how come it didn't kill it? It's because you didn't use the right herbicide. That's where we would have said, hey, instead of using Graze On Next, let's use Duracore, so that you're getting everything Graze On Next is going to get, but then you're going to get this buckhorn plantain, you're going to get it knocked out of the way with ease. And therefore, it wouldn't have been a phone call. So make sure you're using the correct herbicide with the scenario you're dealing with. Because we have now with Duracore, something that's getting 46 to 50 more weeds than what Graze On Next can get at its highest rate. And we've got another herbicide that's going to be coming out this spring. And we've got other herbicides that are being ramped up to be coming down the pipeline very soon. A lot of moving parts are happening for you and me as producers to have a whole lot easier access to getting these hard to control weeds out of the way with less use rates and no volatility concerns. So make sure you're using the proper herbicide for your weed problem, the proper rates, and again, proper coverage. Let's talk about grazing management. This is where everything kind of starts to go a little bit faster here. All right. Now, some people say, hey, you don't want to graze your grasses below 7 inches. I know a lot of universities are doing some studies on that, and that's great. And I don't mean disrespect when I say this, but you know, and I've been with the university system. It's easy to do plot work. Okay, I do that for a living now still. It's easy to do plot work and try different things, but if you come to Clark Cattle, things are going to be put into more of a reality situation. Here's the deal, and I don't mean that in any kind of political sense. All right, 4 inches, 3.5 to 4 inches of grass. We don't want to go below that. Then we're starting to deal with, if it's a orchard grass, we're starting to deal with a crown issue. We're starting to go into a stress issue. So anything around that 4-inch mark, it's time to move those cattle off. Okay, even in a haying situation, yes, you can raise that mower up and get quality hay and not put your forages in a stressful situation. Okay, you might not get as many bales as you normally would, but let me ask you a question. Are we going for tonnage or are we going for quality? And are we going to have a hay field that is going to produce for me throughout the rest of the season and for years to come? That's a return of investment. So make sure we're in that area. Now, go back to that 7-inch. If you can manage that, I'm all about more leaf, more photosensitization, more food for that grass, less stress. I'm all for it. But it's going to be tough because you can get down 7 inches really, really quick grazing cattle. 4-inch mark gives you some flexibility without running into a bad situation. Just want to throw some ideas out there of rotational grazing. When you go into pasture management, remember this is that building block that falls back on you as the producer. Rotational grazing is a very good thing. Very easy. A lot of us do it. I'm sure you do. Some of you do it as well. Start off your herd in paddock number 1. You get to that 4-inch mark. Yep, you're going to have to see how much food they're eating. All right. It's kind of like making sure that you ain't putting too much on your plate and then get old bellyache. We don't want to put too much in their plate because that's going to hurt us. And what I mean by that is this. When we go to pasture 2 or paddock 2, pasture 1 or paddock 1 starts to rest. By the time we get to paddock 3, paddock 1 should be really coming back into play to be grazed. We get through with paddock 3 and back into paddock 4, paddock 1 should be just thick and lush and ready to be grazed again without any issues. But if we don't manage that grazing and we put that grass in a stressful situation, once we get to paddock 3, we might go back over here to paddock 1 and go, man, I didn't leave much grass on it. A leaf on that grass, and we haven't had a lot of rain, and it ain't growing as fast as I need it to. And here I am needing to go over to pasture 4, and pasture 1 is still lagging way behind. And that's where you start to have to supplement feed or supplement even some hay in that September, August time period. And yes, sir, yes, ma'am, I have had to do that before, and it gets costly quick. More than likely, you start to sell a few head of cattle because you can't spend all your feed or spend all your money on feed, and you can't use up all your hay in early months knowing that winter ain't here yet. So making sure that you are, however you want to rotate, just make sure you've got some type of rotation, and you're not doing that continuous grazing, because that continuous grazing, cattle are going to start picking spots where they want to be, and that's what gets you in trouble. Some stuff we did even at Mississippi State, where we did some trials with strip grazing management, where you can bring your cows into a certain area. This is a better picture of it right here. Some people even call this mob grazing, where you turn in a large amount of cattle in a strip area. You can see where they've been and see where they're going. The only reason I don't like this, especially in cow-calf scenario, is if you've got calves in here, as many cattle as you try to push into these little strip grazing areas, I have seen calves get trampled, get stepped on, get hurt, get a broke leg, and you know what happens from there. The vet's going to give you the long face, okay? Another good technique, and I don't have a picture on here, but especially when you're weaning calves, a good technique is maybe even doing fence line weaning. Go ahead and you've got your cattle out there and they're grazing in paddock 1 or pasture 1, and you can go out there and put up a hot wire, just one wire, enough where calves can go underneath it, and they can start grazing grass in an area that the cows aren't going to really flood in there and eat down really quick. And that helps get your calves rumen system rolling and going. It gets them hooked on that grass, and it actually makes it easier when you do fully wean them. They're already used to grazing and eating, and they really don't lose pounds as some calves can do when you immediately take them off mom and put them in the weaning lot. Okay, so just something you could look at doing. Get with your extension agent. I'm sure they've got a lot more literature on that. Again, reseeding, just one picture here. This is that last building block. You might get down into this area here where you go in there and you spray, and you've got some dead skeletons out here, and you've got these little patches of fescue, but in these little light spots, you might even have some of this stuff called clover. But you might have to go in there and start reseeding. You might have to add some grasses in there, especially where, you know, you wintered your cattle, you hate them all and everything. Pigweed loves to thrive there. You might have to interseed some grasses there to get it back up to a grazing stability moving forward, so that we've got a nice, even, lush grass out in our pastures. This is actually one of our customers and speakers. She's a veterinarian in Alabama. This is actually her farm as well. So understand this. With these 4 building blocks, these check marks is definitely things that you will get out of it. Number 1, you can increase your stock capacity or hold what you got. You don't have to sell. You're going to increase your return of investment. You could get, I know the market's kind of up and down, but with having a good grazing forage program, you can easily get into that top 10, top 20% of pound prices. And then, and we're going to talk about here in just a second, you're going to increase your herd health. Okay? Question number 2 is at this moment. So the question is, you've heard me talk about return of investment, the ROI. You've probably heard Corteva talk about it quite a bit. Why is having a return of investment important to your operation? Why do I talk about it that much? Oh, we got a fight going now.
Looks like you've got a dead even chase going on too.
I know it. And you know, this was a little bit of a trick question. This was to keep everybody awake. This was the moment either you're going to sleep on me or you're truly awake. I like it. I like it. It is a dead heat. All right, so 2% said marketing. 48% said, look, this is the bottom line of my business plan. And 0% said loans. Thank you for no votes on that. And the other one is profitability of expense. So marketing, not really. You know, you could say, well, it's a great marketing tool in a sense. Yeah, it is. But at the end of the day, the bottom line expense business plan, the profitability expense, those are your top 2. But here's the trick. Here's the trick on this. You can have this on your business plan. I need to make a return on investment. But are you actually getting that? And if you don't, and what I mean by that is this, if you're only having it on your business plan, but you're not actively looking at it as, I've got to make a profit, then that's where it can just be another line item. You've got to make sure that you're thinking what everything you do comes with an expense that you've got to make a profit on. You have to make a profit, okay? And I know that your tax person might say, well, no, or you might say to your tax person, no, I need to show a loss, but at the end of the day in the cattle business, you've got to have some profitability. And that is where that return on investment comes into play. It's a great business planning tool, but is it actually something that is being activated in your day-to-day thinking, your day-to-day expenses? When you spend that money or you crank up that tractor, are you thinking, is this a return of my investment? I believe it was what Doc said a while ago on her presentation, if I'm not mistaken. You know, it's like looking at those feed values and those feed tags. We want to make sure that it might be a reputable company, it might be a pretty bag, but is it giving me, when I spend that dollar, am I getting that dollar plus some back out of what I'm actually putting into my cattle? So it's very important to understand that it is about profitability, not just a line item, but true profitability, something hardcore that you can see. All right, keep going here. I've only got about 9 more slides, and then I'm going to shut up because we're going to talk a little bit about herd health. So when we're talking about herd health, how in the world does this even get involved in pasture management? Well, by 2 things. Number 1, toxic weeds. And I should even put fescue in there because fescue can be a toxic headache at times. And then parasites. Those are 2 things, and there's plenty more. You're going to start to see this thing start to develop. But tonight, I just want to talk about 2 things where Corteva, through the pasture management, has a focus on herd health. That's the great thing about what we get to do as specialists out here. It's not just about weed control and chemical sales and all that. No, it is about being able to talk about the entire picture, talk about the whole story, talk about your entire operation. All right. And if you ever get me out on your farm, that's what we get to do. I'm going to ride with you and we're going to look at things. And I'm not just going to tell you how to control your weeds, but we're going to talk about the entire picture on how to make sure that you are staying sustainable. And herd health falls into that. Okay. So what do we mean by these two blocks though, as toxic weeds and parasites? Remember earlier when I said some people even say, well, you can go out and graze different weeds and everything and your cattle will be just fine? Well, let me ask you a question. Did you know that buttercup is toxic? Buttercup can cause issues with cattle's stomach. Absolutely it can. Absolutely it can. But let's talk about something else. A good grazing management program is just as important as a good vaccine, a good feed, and a good mineral program, yet it's always overlooked. Here's the thing, and my wife's a veterinarian, so I'm legally able to say this, okay? Now, she'll probably give me the skunk eye, but at the end of the day, I want you to understand something. Your cattle don't have to have a vaccine program. They need it, but they don't have to have it to survive. Number two, they don't have to have the best feed program. They need it. They don't have to have it. They don't have to have the best mineral out there either. They can just have an old salt block, sulfur block, trace mineral block, and that's it. But cattle have to have grass. They have to have forages, or they cannot survive. All of that falls into this program. Now, we do want you to have a good vaccine program. We do want you to have a good feed program, and we want you to have a good mineral program. But we also want you to have a good forage program, a good management program. And we don't want to be the one that's overlooked, because we are the one that, honestly, at the end of the day, is the most necessity one. Okay? Keep going here. So when we're talking about herd health, there's two things to talk about tonight, is toxic weeds and parasite issues. So when we're talking about herd health and we're running into with the toxic weed issues, we're talking about weeds like perilla mint, which is an annual weed, or poison hemlock, which is a biennial weed. And when we're talking about biennial weeds like poison hemlock, we're talking about those weeds will start germinating in October and last all the way through spring. They'll blow up. Of course, they'll bolt up. But especially poison hemlock, every piece of that plant is toxic. Whereas perilla mint, its toxins lie in the leaf structure, or that tallest part of the plant. What about nightshades? Something that grows, honestly, on hillsides, creek banks, stuff like that. Absolutely. And you even have some that are annual and perennial. White snake root, something that grows vigorously in Tennessee. It's honestly been the only state that I've been able to find a whole lot of it at. And white snake root, which is a perennial shrubbery style plant, really grows in the fence line. It's got more toxins in it and it's stouter than what perilla mint is. And perilla mint costs the cattle industry thousands of dollars every year in calf death. But again, what about that last one, buttercup? Buttercup causes gastrointestinal, if I can say that word correctly, irritation, even oral blisters in our equine species, our horses. But in these other ones, I want you to understand something. You're getting to respiratory distress or failure. You can even have trembles. And if we're talking grasses, you get the Dallas staggers with Dallas grasses out there. You can even get into milk toxins. And then, of course, the lung tissue damage, which goes back to this respiratory distress. The thing is, when you have an issue with cows or even calves, and it's mainly calves when we're talking about perilla mint, you're really not going to have time to get a hold of a veterinarian and get them out there to administer a shot in time to save them. Because by the time you even see the signs that they have ingested perilla mint or poison hemlock or white snake root, you're already about 15 to 20 minutes into the issue. and it takes about 45 minutes total before that animal becomes deceased. Okay, so this becomes a herd health issue by having those toxins out there. We want to make sure that through proper pasture management, we're identifying these high-end toxic weeds that affect our cattle's health and getting them out of there. If you've got fescue, we want to make sure that you don't run into fescue toxicity issues like fescue foot, even down to having issues with pregnancy rates, getting those cows back bred again. Like Doc said, and I fully agree with her, that cow who is giving you that calf, which is honestly a luxury to us, she should be having a calf every 365 days a year. If she's not, it's time to go down the road. But these side effects, these health issues that are in our forages, that are in our weed species, can cause these things as well. And just by properly managing them, we can start to take away some of those herd health issues that are out there. The other thing I want to talk about really quick is having parasite issues within our cattle. All right. So when we're talking about parasite issues, we're mainly talking about the larva. We're talking about the first 4 inches of that grass leaf down to the soil surface, usually because of overstocking and overgrazing. Remember that building block number 3, grazing management? This is where that also plays in a key. We want to make sure that we are giving that grazing animal enough forage, that they're not down there at ground level. Now, back home in Texas, where things can get really dry, and if you don't have enough grass there for them to graze, and you've got a lot of just dust, all right, what's that cow doing when they're down there trying to get grass that's really shallow, not very tall? What are they ingesting into their nostrils? That's where you can come up with a lot of pneumonia issues, okay? And then you're spending a lot of money there on medication that can get costly, all right? And then it does feed into that return investment. You have to add those costs into that cow or into that calf, and then of course those come out of your possible profitabilities. So just to kind of give you 3 parasites just to be aware of. This isn't any ruminant animal. You might be familiar with this, with even down to some goats and everything. But the barber pole worm, okay, the brown stomach worm, and then the bankrupt worm. Those are just 3 simple parasites that can easily cause issues with our ruminant animals. Yes, even cattle. And these are easy parasites that, number 1, we can help eliminate some of the problem, not all of it, but some of the problem just by having proper grazing management. The other thing is, and I don't want to cause a big storm on this when I say this, but this also, by not truly understanding how grazing affects our herd health, this is where wormers, dewormers get used too much, too often, and it can build resistance, and that does cause our cattle industry a lot of money right there. So with that, with herd health, with using Duracor, Grazon X, Proclova, Pasture Guard, and Remedy, yes, I did say Proclova. You'll probably start to hear more about that very soon. It's our newest herbicide coming out this next spring. We can affect the herd health by eliminating those toxic weeds, help with the parasite control under good grazing management, which means we have a good grass stand, helps out with our conception rates, helps us with our body condition scores like Dr. Harmon mentioned about earlier today in her presentation, helps with that net positive on nutrition, and then absolutely helps with the net positive of pounds increased on our calves when they're out there grazing. So with that, I thank you for your time. I thank you for allowing me to be a part of this meeting. I hope that you took some nuggets tonight out of this. You can always find more information about our products and who we are and what we're about, okay, at Corteva, at CortevaAgriscience.com, rangeandpasture.com if you're wanting directly information about range and pasture. With that, Miss Sarah, I will turn it back over to you, ma'am.
Any questions for Jeff? Okay, we have one that just showed up in the chat box. What is a good cattle per acre ratio to prevent overgrazing?
A good cattle stocking capacity. Well, first of all, it just depends on how much forages you got. But pretty much Tennessee has some really good pastures overall. So I would easily say I'd say probably 2 cow-calf pairs per acre, maybe 2.5. But I don't think I'd want to push it farther from that. Would be sufficient. Back home, it's like 1 cow-calf unit per 10 acres. So there's a lot more forages in the east, and I like that.
Right. Got another one show up. Oh, 2 more. Do you feel that dry fertilizer impregnated with herbicide does equally well as spraying?
Yes and no. And what I mean by no, I'll start with the no first, is if we're going out with really mature weeds, absolutely not. We're going to be behind the 8 ball. But if we go proactively, and we know what time of the year we're wanting to get aggressive, then yes, it does, because you're relying on the residual at that point in time, and as long as that plant is actively growing, then it is actively using its root system, and therefore we get root uptake of that residual herbicide into that plant, and it dies pretty quickly. We've got 3 good years of experience with that in Tennessee, and it has been very successful in Tennessee. But it is those mature weeds where we probably need to back up and do a foliar application, because we're going to get more through translocation through that leaf structure versus just solely looking at root uptake of that residual herbicide.
Jeff, you've become very popular. I have like 7 more now, and I'm not even kidding.
They are bored.
No, they're actually really good questions. They're really good
I
questions.
like it.
Blake woke up.
Blake woke up.
Poor Blake.
Have at it. Have at it.
This one I actually like, and I know this is a question that a lot of producers have across East Tennessee, and it may be one of those things where I don't have a good answer for you, but if anybody would know, it'd be you. What is the best product to control Johnson grass?
Cows. Johnson grass is good TDN, good protein. Just got to manage it around frost and drought. But if you're wanting to kill it, we truly don't have anything on the market for a grass-on-grass species. There is a herbicide out there called Outrider that it is a spot treatment. It works really well on Johnson grass. It's not selective. You got to remember, when you start getting into grass-on-grass herbicides, it is very hard to get selective. So don't go out and do a lot of broadcasting with it. It would be a spot treatment only. Johnson grass is very deep-rooted, very vigorous growing. So you might have to do a couple applications, but at the end of the day, if you can graze it and manage it, I'm telling you, your cows will send you a Christmas card. Good question.
Okay. Let's see. Can you repeat what you said about fescue toxicity, and is it the same concern in cattle that it is in horses?
Yeah, so with horses, great question, by the way. Man, I like that. So when we're talking about fescue toxicity issues, it's when fescue has gone fully mature, it's put out its seed, all of its alkaloids are concentrated in the seed. It's usually around 80 to 85% of the concentration. When we're dealing with horses, we look at 2 things: agalacta, which means the reduction of milk that the horse should be putting out, but more importantly, red bag disease, where the fluid bag is inverted around that foal on the inside, and typically that foal is dead. And it's all caused by fescue. when we're talking with cattle, the biggest headache around cattle is loss of weight. They don't want to eat. They want to just stand in cool spots. If you're got cows or you see cows standing in the middle of a pond and it's 77 degrees out there, there's a great telltale sign that you got fescue issues. Fescue foot is still prominent. You can have issues with, the tips of their ears getting easily falling off, losing their ends of their tails and everything, the extremities. Conception rate is around 70% or lower. And you know as well as I do from running cattle, you can't have that and be sustainable. That's not feasible on conception rates. And it's all because of their increased body temperature. So cattle take it a lot harder than horses. Typically, it's just the red bag issue with the horses.
Is there a specific wait time after spraying before they can put cows back to pasture?
Yeah. So great thing is with our herbicides, even our residual herbicides, there are no livestock restrictions, so that you can actually go spray while your cattle are out in the field. And the only time I personally would not do that is if you've identified some toxic weed issues, because a toxic weed, when you spray it, it becomes more toxic. It releases more toxins within the plant, more alkaloids, because it's trying to survive. So it releases more, and therefore it can become more palatable, and therefore also more dangerous from a toxicity standpoint. But you can move your cattle off, spray, put your cattle right back on. Horses, the same thing. The only problem is, especially with horses, is if you're going to take their manure and try to sell it, we don't want you to do that, simply because that residual is still in that manure.
It's like you led right into the next question, which is, would you discourage spreading horse manure or other kinds of manure on the pastures?
Oh, no. If the manure is going back on the pasture, absolutely not. If that manure is staying in a compost situation, being sold commercially, then that's where we have an issue, because aminopyrrolid, which is in Grazon Next, it's in Chaparral, and it's in Duracore, it doesn't take much to kill vegetation, flowers, or vegetables at all. But if it's going back on the pasture, you won't hurt a bit, not a bit.
Did you get to the Dallas grass, Sarah? I had to leave a second about the problems, issues with Dallas grass.
I'm going right down the list. We got 2 big weed questions left.
Okay.
And one of them is about Dallas grass. They say, is it a good forage? Do we want to kill it? And how do we kill it if we want to?
Yeah, no, it is a good forage. Absolutely. What you can run into is, once it puts up its little peace sign and it's got little seed heads up there, they become matted. It's an ergot. And when those cows go by and they lick it off, when they're eating that grass, what it causes is a neurological issue. And they call it the old Dallas staggers. They'll kind of twist their necks, and they'll kind of turn, and sometimes they'll walk in circles. It can cause some long-term effects. That's probably where the veterinarian, if she's still on here, could probably answer some more questions on that. That's going to be out of my wheelhouse for sure. But yet, if it is kept in a good grazing program, have some other forages in there with it, yes, it's still a very good grass. Absolutely.
Okay. There's a couple more on here, but the biggest one is in a situation where you bought a new farm, how long is it going to take to fully eliminate the 2-foot-tall chicory weed type weeds by spraying if that field has been mowed for years and years and years beforehand?
Yeah, great question. Patience, taking small bites. So if you've got multiple acres, take small bites. Start off small, because you don't want to go out there and just drop a whole bunch of money and get discouraged, because that can easily happen when you're kind of in that scenario. So 2 things you can do. Number 1, you got to remember chicory starts germinating in the month of October, about mid-October. You see it in its flat rosette stage in the month of March. That's where we need to start hitting it. So therefore, if you've got a problem with chicory, you're spring applying herbicide. That's where you want to do it. Once it starts to bolt, you got to remember, when it bolts, you don't have hardly any leaf structure on that plant at all. We're talking little bitty, minute little leaves. That's not enough leaf structure to get translocation in. So therefore, we're relying on root uptake. But if you get it while it's still in that rosette stage, so that means you can do a fall application, you can do a spring application. You're really going to be ahead of the curve at that point in time. If it's something that's been mowed for many years, it might take you 2 to 3 years of applying to get most of it out of the way. You got to remember, there is no such thing as 100%. You'll never get 100%. Mother Nature will not allow you to never have weeds. You'll always have weeds. What you're wanting to do, though, is be up in that 80 to 90% control rate so that you might be spot spraying here and there and not doing a broadcast. But that's the route I would personally take. And then outside of that, again, just have a little bit of patience. It didn't get there overnight. You ain't going to fix it overnight.
Definitely. Got a few more coming in. Okay. I'm going to summarize a couple of these. One is a point, can you talk a little bit about surfactant and the need for that, and maybe specifically which herbicides, if the answer is not all of them. And then also there's been a couple of questions about, does Corteva just provide the chemical, or do they also provide a service to come out and spray, and talk a little bit about that. And also, do you make farm visits? So that kind of goes together.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of my favorite parts of the job. Let's go to that first question about surfactants. Is a surfactant needed? Absolutely. And here's why. A surfactant takes that water droplet and turns it into sticky glue. And what I mean by that is you get on some of these plants, it's got a waxy leaf structure on top of that leaf. Without having a surfactant on there, that water droplet is going to fall down on, I'm trying to get in the camera. It's going to fall down that leaf and then roll right off. So you're going to lose a lot of herbicide. Adding a surfactant, which is pennies on the dollar, folks. It's cheap. We don't sell it, but I know the co-ops produce it out there for you to use. It's going to take that water droplet, hit that leaf structure, and guess what? My hand didn't move, did it? It sticks it. Then that surfactant not only sticks it to that plant or that leaf structure, it acts as an agent to open up that cuticle to that leaf and get your herbicide in faster. So you don't have to have it, but I'm telling you, you're crazy not to put it in the tank when it's pennies on the dollar and it gets the herbicide into that plant faster without any waste. So I hope that answered your question there. And what was the next question?
Basically, do you make farm visits, and does Corteva do, I would assume we mean like custom spraying.
Yeah, so Corteva doesn't offer any kind of custom spraying at all. We do provide the chemistry, we provide the training, especially to like things like tonight with retailers and stuff like that. Do we do farm visits? Yes, that is one of my most favorite things to do in this job, is to not be in my office here, but to be out on your farm and getting to see your operation, help you put together a common sense plan, business plan, pasture management plan. And then you know what else I want to do? I want to see your cows. I love cows. I raise cows. I've been around cows all my life. And I want to see your operation because I know that's something that you're proud of, and I want to enjoy that with you. The only thing I have is one fee, glass of sweet tea. That's all. That's it.
The infamous buttercups. When's the best time to kill those?
So buttercup, it's about the size of your thumbnail by the end of this month. The best time to get the most buttercup all at one time is going to be in that March application. If you wait till about mid-April to late April, you're getting really late. It's bolting. It's starting to put on its flower. And if we can continue to have these warm winters, you know, we had buttercup flowering at the end of March in certain areas this past year. Maybe it's just because 2020 is so jacked up. But definitely we want to look at that mid to late March application for buttercup control.
Jeff, there's a couple here that are similar, whether or not cattle need to be removed when spreading fertilizer, and also I assume with the impregnated, with the herbicide also about animal removal.
Yeah, no, there's no need for animal removal. You know, if you want to do it, hey, you can, but every one of our herbicides except Grazon P&D, there is no livestock restrictions at all. So you don't have to, you know, move them and then wait certain days. It is safe for them to be grazing while that's being applied. There's no problem to it at all.
Manny, do you want to catch the one about crabgrass and Dallas grass choking out fescue?
Okay, yeah, and I think, and then he's also asking maybe more detail than we want, but about the impregnated fertilizer. Does that kill by contact, or can it actually kill the root system as well?
Yeah, so when we're doing the DFI, majority of your kill on most weeds come by root uptake. So they're residual going into the soil, root uptaking it from the nutrient uptake, takes it right in with it, and it kills the plant. Certain weed species, kind of like thistle, you know, something that's got a little bit more leaf structure. Some of the prills can land on that leaf and then deliver the herbicide through, you know, through translocation in the plant through that. But when we really talk about DFI, majority of that is going through root uptake, yes.
And a crabgrass recommendation. Of course, crabgrass in some of our pastures in the summertime is the best forage we have.
Yeah, the only forage you have, absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, I'm a big fan of crabgrass. But you know, that and Johnson grass are two questions I get. I mean, honestly, every year throughout meetings, and I always say, look, if you don't want it, let me bring my cattle down to you. Crabgrass is a good grass, great forage. It's definitely insurance in the summertime. I've actually got more producers now, and that are starting to eradicate other forages just so they can add more crabgrass in, because it just does a better job for them. So depending on what your plan is, what your program is, you know, what your pastures, you know, what do you want to get out of your pastures? If you've got crabgrass, don't think it's a bad thing. Can it mat out other grasses? Yes, it prostrates right out there, it grows flat. But it is a very good forage. You'd be very tickled to see what the protein content on it is. You probably wouldn't want to get rid of it at that point in time. But it's a good forage. I don't really give recommendations out there, you know, because there's a lot of varieties. I would say if you're wanting to put some in, you know, either get with your extension agent, get with your co-op you do business with, and see what the best variety for your area is.
Somebody's asking, leading up to one of your products that'll be coming out, about what does not kill clover.
That is Proclova, and it will be out in 2021. We are excited about it. We are waiting federal registration. As soon as we get federal registration, and crossing our fingers, we'll have that by the end of this month. Then you will start to see a lot of publications that are kind of waiting in a kind of a holding stage right now be released. You'll start to see sales sheets be provided. And but yes, it is for white clover only though. So it's not for reds, it's not for crimsons, it's not for Persians, it's not for cowpeas, it's not for alfalfa. It is for white clover and annual lespedeza only. So just make sure that you understand that. But I want to say this. Don't manage your forages. or excuse me, don't manage your clovers, manage your forages. Because if you manage your clovers too tightly, you got to remember it becomes a weed in itself, to the point where you don't have any grasses and you're running over that 70-30 rule. That ends up into a herd health issue because of bloat. We want to make sure that you're utilizing good white clovers in your grazing management program, but we want to make sure that at the end of the day you got what the cows truly need 100% of, and that is enough forages with a little bit of dessert on the side.
Getting into some specifics, I've got somebody pigweed, spiny amaranth, and dock recommendations for control.
Yeah, so pigweed control, Duracor does a great job. Chaparral is still near and dear to my heart on pigweed, especially in places where you feed in the wintertime, and that's usually where it really blows up. Then that May, June, and then that late flushing of August, September. Chaparral is going to give you a lot longer residual. So if you've got a bad mess of it, Chaparral might be the route to go. Outside of that, I would say Duracor. Duracor does a great job. Make sure you're being very proactive on pigweed. If we allow that thing to get to seed or even close to getting to seed, it really becomes a hard plant to get knocked out. We usually just can turn it brown and leave you a lot of skeletons. So we want to make sure we get it when it's young, it's actively growing, so that we can get it out of there very quickly and you don't have to see it anymore. And it doesn't deliver you typically pretty close to 500,000 seeds per plant if you allow that thing to go to seed. So it's a nasty little booger. What was the other weed?
Here's one about reseeding. How soon after can you spray Graze On Next or similar after reseeding?
Yeah, so if we're talking about we have already seeded grasses and then we want to spray, we would need to allow those grasses to germinate and get to its second tillering stage, which means it's at its third and fourth true leaf. That way the grass is mature enough to metabolize the active ingredient aminopyrrolid in Graze On Next, and then not kind of go into a drunk stage, but grow right through it. If we spray it too early, that's where we can slow its growth down. It doesn't really kill it, but it does slow it, and we can have a stagnation of growth of our grasses out in our pastures, which then in there becomes a stressful situation in our forages. If you want to spray and also have some seeding in there, what I would say do is spray first and then reseed. With Graze On Next, you can spray and then reseed 20, 30 days later. With Duracor, you can spray and reseed within 15 days.
Okay, before we ask another question, I'm going to launch this last poll, and if you've still got questions, because we're starting to see some people head to bed, if you still got questions, hang around, but answer this last poll, and then we'll address the rest of the questions.
All right.
Real fast. Nothing too hard. Because once we get into specifics on weeds, we could pick Jeff's brain all night long, I'm sure.
And that's all right.
Huh?
There is 2 questions too, just if you don't read the poll real close. There's a question 1 and a question 2. I didn't see that the first time.
There's actually 4.
Okay. Well, I guess I didn't see them all then. So read all the questions.
Okay. I guess we can answer those other 2 questions while we got that launched. They can answer and listen at the same time if they'd like. What's the best control for, it says barn nettle, but I assume it means like horse nettle, bull nettle.
Yeah, so Carolina horse nettle, the best control for that is either Duracor or Graze On Next. We want to make sure we're getting it before it puts out its seed pod 100%. A good rule of thumb is a great opportunity to spray it and get really great control is when it's starting to put its flower out. It's a little white purplish flower. Once you see that, that's a really good rule of thumb of, hey, it's time to pull the trigger. And during that time, you'll also pick up things like ironweed, goldenrod, yellow crownbeard as well. So it's a good rule of thumb to spray at that flowering stage, and then also understand that you'll catch up a lot of other weeds that are growing during that time as well.
Somebody's wanting to know your contact info. What's the best way to get in touch with you?
I can send that out.
Okay, Sarah, I'll send that out. That's good.
Thank you, sir.
Or I think it's on the screen. Nope.
Well, it's got his name, and it's got some of the Corteva websites, but yeah, Sarah can get that and send it out. We'll have that out to everybody.
Our friend Mr. Lawson has a question. He's asked twice, so I want to make sure we get it asked. What type of sprayer works best, a blower sprayer or a pasture sprayer? So I assume he means like a boom sprayer, or is there a difference?
Yeah, well, there is a blower sprayer out there. Just know that all of our labels do not allow a blower. So if you do use a blower and something happens, it's all on you. We do have some customers that use blower sprayers or mist sprayers, as some people call them. And that will, let me get that off the screen there. That will just automatically go against the label, because a mist blower sprayer throws a big fog out there and it can travel. I sadly get those stories every year of things several miles down the road being killed, and we trace it back to a mist blower. So don't use those. I would personally use something that, like a boom sprayer, an ag spray sprayer is what I personally just bought a new one again this year. And I use a Hamilton nozzle on the back, which is that one little brass nozzle, puts out a nice little fan. You can adjust your pressure on it really easy to have different styles of how much volume you're putting out. And it also gives you great flexibility in the pasture to get up around areas like trees or hillsides, where if you had a boom sprayer, you wouldn't have that availability. So boomless sprayer for me works really great. That's what I also use on my test plots as I'm testing new chemicals, new actives, and they work really, really well.
Cocklebur, when to spray, spring or fall, and then what to spray. Also, dog bine.
Dog bane.
Dog bang's what they been, I think.
Yep. Sorry.
Yeah. So with cocklebur, it's an annual plant. It usually comes on in late summer, but man, here lately, because we've had so much moisture and warm soil temperatures, we've actually seen cocklebur coming on in as early as end of May.
I think I saw it the earliest I've ever seen it this year.
I agree with you 100%, sir. Easy to eradicate. Graze on next, Duracore knocks it out very, very quickly. When we're talking dog bane, that is a very hardy perennial plant. It gets a really stiff stem on it the mature it gets. So dog bane is going to come on midsummer season. I would either use the Duracore Graze on Next and add a little Remedy into the tank with it, about 16 ounces of Remedy. That combination will take out, again, the broadleaf weeds that you've got out there, plus that dog bane.
I just had one sent to me privately. Is there a guide somewhere that kind of gives a cost per acre? Do y'all have that to spray each particular product?
We don't really have a guide for that, and the reason is that depends on what retail store you go and you buy it at. But I will tell you, if you're looking at Duracore Grazon next, you're probably going to be somewhere around, like Duracore is probably going to be around that $9.5, $10 an acre. Grazon next is going to be a little bit more than that now. Chaparral is going to be around $15 an acre, and those are just some rough figures. I can't give you anything on Pro Clova because I'm bound by EPA that I can't do any, say anything on that yet. But you will see that soon. But that'll kind of give you some rough figures. You're going to spend anywhere from $9.5 to $15 an acre for the herbicide.
I think we have reached the end of the questions, unless somebody has a
I
problem.
believe we have. Thank you, Jeff. Great job.
Thank y'all very much, and y'all have a great evening.
Thank you.